In October 1962, the survival of the human race came down to a single argument, shouted inside a sweltering, half-broken submarine at the bottom of the Caribbean. The men aboard believed a war had already started above them. Two of the three officers wanted to fire a nuclear torpedo. One said no, because their orders required all three to agree. That single no is the reason you are alive to hear this. His name was Vasili Arkhipov. There is no statue of him, almost no one has ever heard of him, and he is only the first of five. Five ordinary people who quietly changed the course of history, saved untold millions of lives, and were handed almost nothing in return. This is who they were. To understand what Arkhipov did, you have to understand what he could not know. It was the peak of the Cuban Missile Crisis, the closest the Cold War ever came to going hot. His submarine, B-59, had slipped deep below the Atlantic, out of radio contact with Moscow for days. Above them, American ships had found the sub and were dropping practice depth charges, meant as a signal to surface, not to sink. But nobody had told the men inside that. To the crew, sealed in a hull that was slowly running out of air and cooking in tropical heat, it sounded exactly like the opening of the Third World War. The captain wanted to launch the nuclear torpedo they carried. The political officer agreed. But B-59 was the one submarine in the flotilla that also carried Arkhipov, the second-in-command of the entire fleet, and by chance, launching required the consent of all three senior officers. Arkhipov refused. He argued in that airless dark that they should surface and wait for orders rather than start a war on a guess. He was right. There was no war yet. Had that torpedo fired, historians believe it would almost certainly have triggered a full nuclear exchange between the superpowers. One man, in one argument, held the line. He went home, was quietly sidelined for years, and died in relative obscurity. The world he saved never learned his name. A second name saved more human lives than almost anyone who has ever lived, and he did it with wheat. In the middle of the 20th century, experts were certain the world was about to starve. Population was exploding faster than farms could feed it. Mass famine, they said, was mathematically unavoidable. Millions were expected to die in India, Pakistan, Mexico, and beyond. Norman Borlaug, an American plant scientist, spent years in Mexican fields crossbreeding wheat by hand, chasing a plant that resisted disease, drank in fertilizer, and crucially grew on a short, strong stalk that wouldn't collapse under a heavy head of grain. When he finally had it, harvests didn't just rise, they doubled and doubled again. Countries that had been bracing for catastrophe became self-sufficient in grain within a few years. The wave of death everyone had predicted simply never came. Borlaug's work is widely credited with saving on the order of 1 billion people from starvation, a number so large it stops meaning anything. He won the Nobel Peace Prize, then went straight back to the fields. Ask a stranger on the street to name him, and almost none of them can. The third name is the reason you can survive a car crash, and he made sure it would never make him rich. In the 1950s, cars were becoming fast and common, and the people inside them were dying in enormous numbers. The seatbelts that existed were simple straps across the lap, which in a serious crash could cause terrible internal injuries of their own. The problem was considered nearly unsolvable. Nils Bohlin was an engineer at Volvo who had previously designed ejection seats for fighter jets. He understood, better than almost anyone, how to hold a human body still against violent force. His answer was elegantly simple: a belt that crossed both the chest and the hips and buckled at a single point beside the seat, catching the strongest parts of the body and doing it in one easy motion. The modern three-point seatbelt. Volvo knew what they had, and then they did something almost unheard of. They made the patent open, free for every other carmaker in the world to use, because they decided the invention would save more lives as a gift than as a monopoly. It is now estimated to have saved more than 1 million lives, and it sits in nearly every car ever since. The man who designed it is a name on a patent almost no driver will ever read. The fourth name did something so difficult to believe that after the war, the people who read his report assumed he had exaggerated. He had not. He had, on purpose, gotten himself sent to Auschwitz. Witold Pilecki was an officer in the Polish resistance. Early in the Second World War, when the outside world still knew almost nothing about what was happening inside the German camps, the resistance needed someone on the inside. Pilecki volunteered. He deliberately walked into a street roundup so he would be captured and deported to Auschwitz. He spent nearly 3 years inside. He built a secret network among the prisoners, and he smuggled out reports, some of the earliest first-hand intelligence the Allies received about the systematic murder taking place there. When he had done all he could and feared he would be killed before he could testify, he escaped on foot and wrote it all down. Here is the part that should be taught in every school and almost never is. Pilecki survived the war and was then arrested by Poland's new post-war communist government, which saw a loyal, independent hero as a threat. He was tortured, tried on false charges, and executed. For decades, his own country was forbidden to speak his name. The man who volunteered for the worst place on earth to warn the rest of us was erased by the very people he came home to. The last name belongs to a poor girl on an English beach who found the proof that the world was almost unimaginably old and watched men take the credit while she was alive to see it. Mary Anning grew up in the early 1800s in a seaside town, in a family so poor she sold fossils to tourists to help them eat. But she had an extraordinary eye. As a child, she and her brother uncovered the first correctly identified skeleton of an ichthyosaur, a giant marine reptile from a lost world. She went on to find the first complete plesiosaur and a flying pterosaur, prying them from crumbling, deadly cliffs by hand. Her discoveries were not curiosities. They were evidence, hard physical evidence, that entire kinds of creatures had lived and then vanished from the earth long before any human, at a time when many still believed the world was only a few thousand years old. Her fossils helped force science to confront the true, staggering depth of time. And yet, because she was poor and a woman, she was barred from the scientific societies of her day. The gentlemen scholars who bought her specimens published them, often without crediting the person who had actually risked her life to dig them out of the cliff. She died of cancer at 47, never granted the recognition that was hers. Only long after her death did the world admit whose hands had really changed our understanding of life itself. 5 people, a submarine officer, a wheat scientist, a car engineer, a resistance fighter, and a girl on a beach. Between them, they held off a nuclear war, outran a famine, made the roads survivable, warned us of an atrocity, and pulled back the true age of the world, and not one of them got a fraction of what they were owed. Maybe that is the real lesson of history. The people who change it the most are rarely the ones on the statues. They are the ones who did the right thing in a room where no one was watching and then quietly went home. So tell us, which of these 5 hit you the hardest, and who did we leave out, whose name deserves to be in the next one? Put them in the comments. If you want more of the people history tried to forget, this channel is where we keep finding them.